My name is Hamna Salimi. I'm in grade 10 and I go to Garth Webb. This year is my second year doing the D05 Science Fair and I'm very excited to share my project with you. This year my project is using influenza vaccine data to predict COVID-19 trends. The purpose of my project is to predict long-term COVID-19 vaccine efficiency and long-term COVID-19 trends by using previous data from the influenza virus. Some information and background information on influenza and COVID-19. Influenza, also known as the flu, is caused by a virus in the upper respiratory tract such as your nose, throat, and lungs. In North America, we get our flu vaccine in the cold months of October, November, and December. This is because the virus survives longer outside the body in cold and dry temperatures, and that is why we get our flu vaccine in the winter months. There are three types of influenza virus. Types A, B, and C. Type A affects humans and other mammals. Type B and C affect humans. Type C causes a mild infection, and this is also why we only include type A and type B in the vaccine for influenza, since type C is not as serious and only causes a mild infection. Scientists need to research and predict which subtype and strain for influenza they think is going to be more contagious for that specific year before they recommend a vaccine for us to get. COVID-19, on the mean hand, is caused by one novel coronavirus, and COVID-19 is known to cause more serious illness, and it is also known to spread more quickly than influenza. Moving on to my project. The hypothesis for my project was because there are several strains and subtypes for influenza virus, and COVID-19 is only caused by one novel coronavirus, the influenza vaccine is going to be less efficient than the COVID-19 vaccine. Scientists need to predict which subtype they think is going to be more contagious, and the predictions are not always accurate, which is also why the influenza vaccine is not that efficient. My prediction was also that as the positivity rate for COVID increases, as the year for COVID-19 increases, the positivity rate for COVID-19 will decrease, whereas as the hospitalizations and deaths, as the cases increase, the hospitalizations and deaths will increase because of the number of people infected and because of the fast spread of the virus. Moving on to the procedure. So I started off by researching influenza vaccine data, and I researched things like dominant subtype, type A versus type B cases, height, age occurrence, hospitalizations, deaths, and positivity rate for influenza virus. Each of these specific categories was graphed on its own graph comparing 5 seasons, so 5 years, which were the past few years. Once I had this information, I graphed it, and most of my graphs were bar charts so I can easily compare between years the data for influenza virus. Once I noted some trends from looking at these graphs, I can move on to the COVID-19 portion of my project. So for the COVID-19 predictions, I decided to predict the positivity rate for Ontario as well as the hospitalizations and deaths in Ontario. All of this information is for Ontario since my flu vaccine data was from Ontario and within Ontario. So for positivity rates, I had to do a calculation, which was the number of people infected by COVID-19 divided by the number of people who've been tested for COVID-19. I based the data from 2020, how many people were infected by the end of 2020, as well as the number of people tested, and I could apply that for my graph. And my graph for positivity rate shows the next 5 years, so from years 2021 to 2025 for the positivity rate in Ontario for COVID-19. And as you can see, as the year increases, the positivity rate decreases. Moving on to hospitalizations and deaths. So for this part of the project, I had to see what is the hospitalization rate and death rate for Ontario of COVID-19. The hospitalization rate is 0.05, whereas the death rate is 0.023. I multiplied these numbers to the number of cases I was predicting for. And so my predictions for this were additional to what we have. So for example, if there are X amount of cases, there are Y amount of deaths. If there are X amount of cases, there are Y amount of hospitalizations. So for example, if there are 10,000 cases of COVID-19 that are additional to what we have, there's going to be 500 additional hospitalizations. If there are 10,000 additional cases for COVID-19, there are going to be 225 additional deaths. So as you can see from my graphs, as the number of cases increases, the number of deaths and hospitalizations also increase. So what I found out at the end of my project is that in the coming 5 years, the positivity rates for COVID-19 will be decreasing as there's going to be fewer cases and hospitalizations and deaths. This is also because of COVID-19 vaccines, which is why more of our population gets vaccinated, there's going to be fewer cases. And something I would also like to add is that any number of hospitalizations or deaths for COVID-19 is too high, and our best hope against this virus is to get as much of Ontario's population to be vaccinated as possible. We are very lucky to have a vaccine, and so we should take the opportunity right away when vaccines become available to us. Something I also found was that from the trends I was noticing from influenza virus that can also be applied to COVID-19 is that there's a certain age group that always experiences the most fatal outcomes. This age group is those aged 65 and older. So for example, in the influenza vaccine data, I noticed that even if there are some subtypes only affecting children aged 4 and unders, those aged 65 and older are accounting for a lot of hospitalizations and deaths, which is why they also experience the most fatal outcomes. In conclusion, I just wanted to say for the positivity rate, as the year increases, the positivity rate decreases, whereas the cases, as they increase, the hospitalizations and deaths increases. Something that I would like to improve on for this project, if I were to continue it, is to be including vaccine efficacy. I was going to originally do vaccine efficacy, but I did not have enough data. So I was going to do, for example, if Pfizer or Moderna, for example, they have a vaccine efficacy rate of around 94%, I would sub that into my vaccine efficacy equation and solve for if there are X amount of cases, I need to vaccinate this amount of people. But I did not have the data, and by that I mean I needed to know how many cases were among unvaccinated population in Ontario and how many cases are among the vaccinated population in Ontario. There are not enough people vaccinated yet, so I could not retrieve that data. A challenge that I faced during this project was trying to get good, reliable information, and I needed to know influenza vaccine data information for certain seasons, but I could not find that data clearly, but I came across Public Health on Ontario, and they had all the summaries for previous years, and that's where I got my information from. I would like to thank my parents and sister for supporting me in this project and for keeping me organized. I would also like to thank my STEM club leaders for providing me with resources and answering any questions I had. Lastly, I would like to thank my teacher, Mr. Sanderson, for helping me and providing feedback on my project. Thank you so much for listening to my project. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.